You already know this animal. You know the sound it makes when you walk through the door. You know the weight of it against your leg at night. You know, without having to think about it, what it wants when it looks at you a certain way. You've known animals like this your entire life. So has your mother. So did her grandmother. So did every human being who has ever lived on this planet, going back further than agriculture, further than cities, further than writing. And yet, you have almost certainly never stopped to ask the question that sits underneath all of it. Not, why do we love dogs? That question has easy answers. This one doesn't. The question is, how did this happen at all? What chain of events, stretching back 30,000 years, turned a wild apex predator, an animal that competed with us, stole from us, and regarded us with the same wary suspicion we had for it, into the creature that sleeps at the foot of your bed? And more unsettling still, what did that process do to us? Because the dog didn't just change over those 30,000 years. We did too. 30,000 years ago, the Eurasian steppe was cold and violent and enormous. Two species moved across it. Both lived in organized social groups. Both were highly intelligent. Both hunted large prey over vast distances, not through raw speed, but through endurance, coordination, collective intelligence. Both, in other words, were doing roughly the same thing, in roughly the same landscape. Humans and wolves knew each other well. They competed for the same animals. They stole from each other. They maintained a careful, mutually suspicious distance that had served both species adequately for a very long time. And then it changed. The old version of this story, the one most of us absorbed without ever being formally taught, it goes like this. A human being, probably a hunter, found a wolf puppy, took it home, fed it, raised it, and through superior intelligence and good intentions, gradually tamed the wilderness into something domesticated and useful. It's a flattering story. It puts us at the center. We are the agents. The wolf is the raw material. It is also, almost certainly, wrong. The evidence accumulated over the last 3 decades points towards something more interesting and considerably more humbling. The wolf made the first move. Scientists now believe domestication began not with a human decision, but with a behavioral shift in a single animal, probably a young female, probably at the lowest rung of her pack's social hierarchy, probably hungry. She was drawn to something at the edge of a human camp, the smell of discarded food. Wolves didn't typically approach humans. The relationship was adversarial, the risk high. But for this particular animal, the calculation looked different. Competing with stronger pack members for every meal had a cost. The humans were unpredictable and dangerous, yes, but they also left scraps. And the perimeter of their firelight was, in a cold world, a surprisingly defensible place to be. So she didn't steal and flee the way wolves normally did. She stayed. She tolerated the proximity of people rather than fleeing from it. And in doing so through pure instinct, without intention, without understanding, she made a choice that would alter the trajectory of 2 species across the next 30 millennia. Here is what that means, stated plainly. The dog was not domesticated. The dog domesticated itself. The first quality humans noticed in these early proto-dogs was not loyalty. It wasn't companionship. It wasn't the capacity for affection that we now take for granted. It was their senses. A wolf perceives the world at a resolution humans cannot access. Its ears move independently, scanning frequencies we cannot hear. Its nose detects scents at concentrations invisible to human chemistry, tracking a presence that passed hours ago, reading a landscape the way we might read a printed page. These early dogs sensed approaching danger long before any human guard could, and they announced it. For hunter-gatherers living in a world full of predators and rival groups, this was not a small advantage. It was a living alarm system, posted permanently at the edge of camp, never sleeping, never distracted. That before everything else, before the warmth and the loyalty and the companionship, is what made wolves worth tolerating. Not love, utility. The partnership deepened across generations. The calmer wolves stayed near human camps. The wilder ones drifted back to the forest. The calm ones bred with each other, and with each successive generation, the tamest offspring remained while the others left. No human selected them deliberately. Nature did the sorting, guided by one variable: which animals could tolerate being near people. And slowly, wolves became dogs. Their bodies changed, fur lightened, tails curled upward, ears softened, muzzles shortened. These weren't changes humans engineered, they were the physical signature of an animal adapting to a world structured around human beings. But why would selecting for a calmer temperament produce physical changes at all? For most of human history, no one had a good answer. Then a Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev decided to find out. Belyaev worked at the Institute of Cytology and Genetics in Novosibirsk in a period when the Soviet scientific establishment had made Darwinian genetics politically dangerous to pursue openly. He found a way around it: silver foxes, wild animals, never domesticated. He selected only the tamest 10% of each generation for breeding and exposed the pups to human contact from an early age. He was looking for behavioral change. What he got was far more. After 4 generations, the foxes were wagging their tails and seeking human contact. After a few more, something happened that no one had selected for. Their ears began to droop. Their tails curled, their coats lightened, and developed new color patterns. Physical changes, emerging as a side effect of selecting for docility alone. The mechanism is biochemical. Tame animals produce less adrenaline, the hormone associated with fear and aggression. Adrenaline and melanin, the pigment responsible for coat color, share the same biochemical pathway. Reduce the production of one, and you inadvertently reduce the other. The floppy ears, the lighter coats, the curled tails, all of it traces back to a single root: a calmer nervous system. This means that when those first wolves chose to stay near human camps, the physical transformation that followed everything that makes a dog look like a dog rather than a wolf was not a goal. It was a consequence. If you're fascinated by discovering what we really are, subscribe to the channel. This is just the beginning. But the story of how dogs spread across the earth is more complicated and more troubling than a simple map of migration routes suggests. When the first humans crossed from northeastern Asia into the Americas, somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 years ago, they didn't travel alone. Their dogs came with them. And those dogs, isolated from Eurasian populations for thousands of years, evolved in their own direction, shaped by new climates, new prey, new human needs. By the time European explorers reached the Americas in the late 15th century, the indigenous peoples had developed dozens of their own distinct breeds. Dogs that guarded llamas and alpacas in the Andes. Dogs small enough to be carried in a hunter's pouch and released when prey was spotted. Dogs bred in the Pacific Northwest specifically for their wool sheared annually, their fur woven into ceremonial blankets that were among the most valued objects in the region. These were not inferior versions of European breeds. They were independent solutions to the same ancient problem: how to make a wolf useful. And then almost all of them disappeared. European ships carried diseases. Everyone knows what those diseases did to the human population of the Americas. What fewer people know is that the European dogs carried their own pathogens, old world bacteria and viruses, to which pre-contact dogs had no immunity. Within a few generations, dogs that had accompanied the first Americans across the Bering Land Bridge, animals with a lineage stretching back tens of thousands of years, were functionally extinct, replaced almost entirely by European breeds. Genetic studies have confirmed the scale of the erasure. Less than 2% of dogs living in the Americas today carry any detectable trace of pre-contact ancestry. Breeds that have been called Native American for centuries turn out on genetic analysis to be almost entirely European in origin. The ancient lineage is gone. What remains are the names, the shapes, and the stories. Almost all of it gone. But not quite all. And the exception, when we get to it, is stranger than anyone predicted. Around 12,000 years ago, something changed in human life so completely that almost everything that followed cities, laws, literature, science, this conversation became possible because of it. Humans stopped moving. In what is now Iraq and Syria, people began to settle around wild stands of wheat and barley. Instead of following food, they grew it. Instead of ranging across the steppe, they built permanent structures. And with that transition came a problem no one had faced before. A field of ripe grain is not just food for humans. It's food for deer, wild boar, monkeys, rodents, birds, for every creature in the surrounding landscape that can reach it. The early farmers had cleared land and planted crops, and in doing so, built a magnet for every hungry animal within range. They needed protection. And dogs already attuned to the presence of intruders, already disposed to bark at any unfamiliar scent or sound, were the obvious answer. This dynamic is still playing out today, in ways that illuminate the ancient pattern with striking clarity. In a remote agricultural region of southern India, there is a village where rice, peanuts, and bananas grow year-round. Among the humans who live there, a population of free-ranging dogs moves at the margins, not pets, not working animals in any formal sense, just animals that have lived alongside people for so long that the boundary between wild and domestic has become almost invisible. One of them, a yellow dog with white paws, no name, no owner, had spent his life scavenging at the edges of human activity. He watched, he learned routines, and one morning, as a troop of gray langur monkeys descended toward the fields, intelligent, fast-moving primates that stripped banana plants and raided rice stores, his predatory instincts fused with something more calculated. He drove them back, not once, but repeatedly, anticipating their movements, cutting off their retreat, chasing them back up the hillside. A farmer saw it, and the dog's life changed. He was given a name. He was given food. He was given a home. This is, in miniature, the story that played out across the entire ancient world. In Mesopotamia, the first permanent villages kept heavy Mastiff-type dogs as sentinels. In ancient Egypt, breeds that would become the ancestors of today's Pharaoh hound stood watch over the granaries that sustained civilization. In Greece, the Molossians, massive, watchful, with a nose sensitive enough to detect a thief in the dark. In Central America, Mayan cities that rose around maize had dogs guarding the corn stores. In Rome, the empire's vast agricultural wealth was protected by the ancestors of what would eventually become the Mastiff. Wherever civilization grew, dogs guarded the harvest. This was not coincidence. It was the precondition. The bond goes deeper than behavior. A genetic study published in 2013, comparing the DNA of wolves and dogs across dozens of breeds, found that dogs carry 3 specific genetic variants that wolves do not, variants that improve the digestion of starch. The changes appear to have emerged precisely as humans were transitioning to agriculture. The dogs that thrive near farming settlements weren't just tolerated because they were useful. They were, at a molecular level, being shaped by the same transition that was reshaping us. Agriculture requires surplus. Surplus requires protection. And for thousands of years, across every culture that made the leap from nomadic hunting to settled farming, dogs were the protection. They didn't build the first cities, but without them, the first cities might never have survived long enough to become cities. Here is a puzzle worth holding for a moment. A wolf is by nature a predator. Its evolutionary purpose, sharpened over millions of years, is to pursue, kill, and eat large mammals. Sheep, goats, cattle, exactly the animals humans wanted to raise and keep alive. So how did the descendants of wolves become the primary guardians of livestock? How did an animal built to hunt become an animal built to protect its own prey? The answer involves one of the most remarkable feats of behavioral engineering in human history, and it works by exploiting something dogs already had in abundance: the capacity to bond. In the steppes of Mongolia, a practice exists that is thousands of years old. A bankar, the ancient livestock guardian dog of the Mongolian steppe, is taken from its mother at 2 months old. The separation is deliberate and, by design, traumatic. The puppy is not placed with humans, not with other dogs, with sheep. For weeks and months, the young dog lives among the flock. It eats when they eat, sleeps when they sleep, travels when they travel. The lambs become its siblings. The rams become its elders. The flock becomes in every neurological and behavioral sense that matters to a young social animal its family. And family, for a dog, is something worth protecting. This is not a trick. It's not a suppression of the dog's predatory instincts, at least, not entirely. It's a redirection of something more fundamental. The same attachment that would ordinarily bind a wolf to its pack is here transferred, with careful and patient human management, to a flock of sheep. The dog doesn't guard the sheep because it has been trained to guard. It guards them because they are its family. And when a wolf appears, an animal that smells like threat, like something that wants to harm the family, the dog's response is not confusion. It is fury. A fully trained pair of Bankar dogs, documented in studies of the Mongolian Bankar Dog Project, can effectively deter wolves and snow leopards, protecting not just the herd, but the wolf population itself, by eliminating the retaliatory killings that follow unprotected livestock losses. The system is ancient. The logic is simple. And it works because the dog is not performing a task, it is defending its world. The method spread. Dogs were paired with goats in the Middle East, with sheep in Persia, with cattle in India, with horses on the steppes of Central Asia. The Romans developed the ancestor of the Rottweiler specifically to accompany the herds that fed their legions, a dog that moved with the military supply chain, guarding the meat on the hoof. The partnership between dogs and livestock didn't just protect individual animals, readily available meat, fertilizer for crops, wool and leather for clothing, bone for tools, fat for candles and cooking. Every benefit of a settled pastoral economy, every advantage that separated herding cultures from pure hunter-gatherers, was made possible, in part, by a dog standing watch in the dark. The hunt came first. Human beings had been observing wolves hunt for thousands of years before domestication. They understood, at some intuitive level, what made wolves so effective. Not individual strength, but collective intelligence. A wolf pack doesn't just chase prey. It communicates, coordinates, and adapts. Different members play different roles. The hunt is a distributed intelligence, spread across multiple bodies. When dogs joined human hunting parties, they brought exactly this capacity into a collaboration with human planning and human weapons. The results were dramatic. Historical accounts suggest the introduction of hunting dogs roughly doubled the number of animals a group of humans could catch. For communities in which a winter without sufficient meat reserves could mean starvation, this was not a marginal improvement. It was the difference between survival and death. Over thousands of years, humans began to notice that different dogs excelled at different aspects of the hunt. Some were faster, some had better endurance, some had an uncanny ability to follow a scent, some were fearless enough to flush prey from dense undergrowth. And so began the first intentional genetic engineering in human history. Selective breeding, choosing animals with desired traits and allowing them to reproduce, was applied to dogs thousands of years before it was applied systematically to wheat or cattle. By around 3,000 years ago, the first clearly man-made breeds had emerged. Every breed tells a story. Every physical quirk is the answer to a specific human need. Fishermen in what is now Newfoundland developed a dog with a dense, water-resistant coat and a natural affinity for swimming, an animal that could retrieve fish that fell from hooks into freezing Atlantic water. That dog became the Labrador Retriever. Today, it is one of the most popular family pets on Earth. Its original purpose, almost entirely forgotten. Scottish miners needed a dog small enough to pursue rats through the narrow tunnels of underground mines. Fierce, determined, with almost no natural fear. The Yorkshire Terrier, now found on sofas in urban apartments, entirely unaware of its working-class origins. A country vicar in 19th-century England wanted a terrier short-legged enough to slip into the narrow earths where foxes took refuge. The Jack Russell. In France, hunters pursuing waterfowl needed a dog that could swim through reeds and retrieve birds from cold marshes. The poodle, famous today as an ornamental salon dog, began its life as a highly functional, highly athletic bird retriever. German hunters pursuing badgers into their underground burrows needed a dog long enough and short-legged enough to follow them down. The Dachshund. Across Russia and the Central Asian steppe, dogs built for speed over open ground, the Borzoi, the Saluki, the Afghan hound, became the hunting companions of nomads and desert peoples alike. Short legs, webbed feet, long ears, waterproof coats. Each one an answer to a question that humans asked thousands of years ago, refined through generations of partnership into a physical form. But selective breeding explains only part of what dogs became. Some of what emerged from 30,000 years of living alongside us was never engineered by anyone. John Pilley was a retired psychology professor who spent years teaching a border collie named Chaser the names of objects methodically, systematically, one by one. By the time his research was published, Chaser had learned more than 1,000 distinct names. She could retrieve any of them on command. She could also follow 3-element grammatical instructions, understanding not just which object was meant, but what action to perform and where to take it. She was not following patterns. She was processing syntax. No one bred Chaser for this. No hunter needed a dog that understood grammar. This capacity, this deep attunement to human language and intention, appears to have accumulated quietly, over millennia, simply from living in close proximity to the most language-dependent species on Earth. Dogs learn to listen, really listen. Consider what a dog's nose actually is. At the back of a dog's nasal cavity lies a mucous membrane, a pleated, folded sheet of tissue roughly 120 square centimeters in area. The equivalent structure in a human being is about 20 square centimeters. That membrane contains approximately 300 million olfactory receptor cells, each capable of detecting specific molecular signatures. The dog's brain then processes these signals through a neural infrastructure far more devoted to smell than anything in the human skull. In practice, this means a dog can detect scents present in concentrations of parts per trillion. It can distinguish individual molecular components within complex mixtures. It can identify not just what a smell is, but where it came from, how long ago it was deposited, and with training who left it. The range of what this makes possible is still being discovered. Cambodia is one of the most heavily mined landscapes on Earth. 4 million landmines and 26 million unexploded ordnance items are still buried beneath its soil. A lethal inheritance from a war that ended decades ago. Detection dogs working with Cambodian mine clearance teams have been documented locating buried devices that no human technology could reliably find, including ordnance buried meters underground, detectable only through trace chemical signatures in the soil above. No sensor array built by human engineering has yet matched what a trained dog can do with its nose on a trail. But there is a cost to treating dogs as tools, and it is worth understanding. Detection dogs burn out. The work is dangerous, repetitive, and unrelenting. Without adequate rest and the maintenance of the bond with their handler, they slow, disengage, and stop finding the work rewarding. Every experienced handler knows this. The lesson is older than any training manual. The performance depends entirely on the relationship. Treat the dog as an instrument, and the instrument fails. Then there is this, perhaps the most unexpected frontier of all. In a prospective double-blind clinical study published in Scientific Reports in November 2024, a research team evaluated a biohybrid platform pairing trained detection dogs with artificial intelligence tools. The trial covered 1,386 participants screened for 4 cancer types: breast, lung, prostate, and colorectal. The dogs worked from breath samples. The results: overall sensitivity and specificity of around 94% each, were replicated across all 4 cancer types, including early-stage cases. The olfactory system that helped a wolf track prey across a frozen steppe 30,000 years ago may, in the coming decades, become one of medicine's most valuable early detection tools. The nose, it turns out, is still only beginning to show us what it can do. For most of human history, the bond between humans and dogs was understood in practical terms. Dogs protected, hunted, herded, carried, and guided. Their emotional contribution was noticed but rarely analyzed, a background warmth that everyone recognized and no one thought to explain. In the last few decades, that has changed. We now have a neurological account of what happens when a human being and a dog look into each other's eyes. When a person makes eye contact with a dog, the brain releases oxytocin, a hormone associated with trust, social bonding, and the early attachment between parents and infants. The same thing happens in the dog. Both parties are experiencing a biochemical bonding response, a shared neurological event that normally occurs only between members of the same species. Think about what that means. 2 species, separated by tens of millions of years of independent evolution, arrived at a shared neurological language for trust, not through accident, not through captivity or coercion, through 30,000 years of choosing, again and again, to be near each other. The human-dog relationship is not merely behavioral, a matter of training and conditioned response. It is, at some level, hardwired. The bond between a person and their dog activates the same neural machinery that evolution built to sustain the closest human relationships. Recent neuroscience has found that dogs process human speech using the same hemispheric division we do. Meaningful words are processed in the left hemisphere. Tone of voice is processed in the right. And dogs only feel genuinely praised when both channels align, when the words and the tone say the same thing. The dog understands not just how you say something, it understands what you actually mean. There is also this: when humans read another person's face, we instinctively focus on the right side, the side that is, in most people, slightly more emotionally expressive. Researchers have now discovered that dogs do the same, but only when looking at humans. Not at other dogs, not at other animals, only at us. It is a behavior that appears to have evolved specifically for this relationship, a form of social attention calibrated over tens of thousands of years to the particular geometry of the human face. Dogs don't just live near us. They are tuned to us neurologically, emotionally, perceptually, in ways that have no parallel in the animal world. They read what we feel. They hear what we mean. They notice what we're looking at. And it turns out that this deep attunement is not just a curiosity. In certain circumstances, it is a form of medicine. When a person spends time with a dog, the emotional feedback runs in both directions. Dogs read our affect with extraordinary precision: body language, vocal tone, micro-expressions, and respond to distress with a consistency that trained human therapists struggle to replicate. The presence of a dog measurably lowers blood pressure, steadies heart rate, reduces cortisol, and lifts mood. Veterans with PTSD, patients in palliative care, children in hospital wards, across every context where human beings are vulnerable and frightened, dogs provide something that medicine alone cannot. The bond is not metaphorical, it is biochemical. A dog named Hatchie was 6 months old when he was found on a railway track in a London suburb, beaten, abandoned, left for dead. He had broken bones throughout his body and a serious leg injury from the impact of a passing train. He was given surgery, a name, and a place in an animal rescue organization. A family in Surrey saw his photograph. They had a young boy named Owen, a child with a rare muscular condition, struggling with the isolation and cruelty that came with being visibly different. They introduced them. Hatchie, an animal beaten and abandoned by people, immediately adjusted his movements when he met Owen. He was 3 times the boy's weight. He could have knocked him over without effort. Instead, he was careful, deliberate, gentle. He didn't know Owen's story. He couldn't understand disability or loneliness or the cruelty of children. He simply recognized something about this particular small human fragility perhaps, or need, and responded to it. Within days, Owen was laughing again. In a county jail in Atlanta, Georgia, a program called Operation Second Chance pairs inmates with dogs from a nearby shelter, animals days away from euthanasia, and asks the prisoners to care for them until a permanent home is found. More than 400 dogs have been rehomed through the program since 2010. What no one fully anticipated was what it would do to the men. Inmates who had spent years making impulsive decisions described learning, for the first time, to slow down because they had to. A dog responds to anxiety. A dog responds to aggression. You cannot rush a training session. You cannot bulldoze through a moment of fear. You cannot take a shortcut when another creature's trust depends on consistency. The men found themselves becoming, almost despite themselves, more patient, more present, more careful. The dogs arrived as the ones being rescued. In many of the cells, it was less clear who was saving whom. Now we return to the erasure. Less than 2% of dogs in the Americas carry any trace of pre-contact ancestry. The indigenous breeds animals with a lineage stretching back to the first crossing of the Bering Land Bridge are, genetically speaking, gone, replaced so completely by European dogs that their existence survives mainly in names, in shapes, in stories. Almost all of it gone. But not quite all. There is a contagious cancer known as canine transmissible venereal tumor, CTVT. It spreads between dogs during mating. It is, in every practical sense, a living thing, a clone of cancerous cells that jumps from host to host, replicating itself, persisting independently of any individual animal. Scientists who study it have traced its DNA back to a single founder, one dog, living approximately 11,000 years ago. One dog whose cancer cells, through an accident of biology, became effectively immortal. Elizabeth Murchison and her team at the Wellcome Sanger Institute, in a study published in Science in 2014, sequenced the genomes of 2 CTVT tumors and established the age and origin of this founder. Subsequent genetic analysis comparing the CTVT founder's profile with worldwide canine populations found it most closely related to one group, the pre-contact dogs of the Americas, an indigenous dog, an animal whose entire lineage was subsequently all but wiped from the earth. All but wiped. Because this cancer, this biological anomaly, still carries that dog's original DNA. It still circulates, host to host, across the Americas and beyond. It is, in a very precise genetic sense, one of the last living traces of a world that was lost. The pre-contact dogs were replaced. Their genes were diluted to near invisibility. But one of them, through the strangest of paths, is still here, still replicating, still technically alive in the only way left available to it. Neither the wolf nor the humans around that first campfire could have known what they were starting. Neither could have anticipated the civilizations that would grow from that tentative proximity at the edge of firelight. Neither could have imagined the detection dog working a Cambodian field at dawn, or the dog sleeping at the foot of a veteran's bed, or the Bankar standing alone on a Mongolian hillside in the dark. But here we are. Dogs helped us survive glacial winters by making us better hunters. They allowed us to stay in one place by guarding the harvest. They allowed us to keep other animals alive long enough to make them valuable. They extended our senses, smell, hearing, night vision, far beyond our biological limits. They came with us across every continent, through every climate, into every kind of human life. And then, when the practical partnerships had been built and the civilizations had grown and we had, paradoxically, become so successful that loneliness became one of our primary afflictions. They were there for that too. They don't judge. They don't evaluate. They don't require explanation, performance, or reciprocation in any currency other than the most basic. Be here. Let me be with you. No other species has pursued such a deep and sustained partnership with another. No other animal has adapted itself so completely, physically, behaviorally, neurologically, to the specific contours of human life. That first wolf didn't choose us for sentimental reasons. She was hungry. She was cold. She was calculating the odds, however instinctively, of a new kind of survival. And somewhere inside that purely pragmatic choice, something else began, something that would outlast every civilization she could not have imagined, and every dog that would come after her. That a species defined by loyalty should leave behind a trace that refuses, even now, to disappear. Feels like something the biology did on purpose. If this is the kind of question you want to keep asking, subscribe to Strange Species. Leave a like if this landed. And tell us in the comments, when did you first understand that your dog was reading you, not the other way around?